If you're designing a database with different types of users, there's one thing you'll need to consider. It could have a big impact on your database design and application. When I say different types of users, this means there are different people that could have different roles in your application or different ways of using a system. For example, you're building a real estate application and you have clients, lawyers, agents, and lenders. Or you've got a school management system and you have teachers, parents, students, and admin staff. The problem with this is, how do you design your database to capture these people? There are two ways you can do this, all in a single table or separate tables. The first option is to use a single table for all of your different types of people. Let's see an example of this. We'll use the school management example. I'll use a tool called Lucidchart for this diagram. We would create a single table and call it something general, such as person. It's up to you what you call it, but it shouldn't be a specific type of user, such as a teacher, because it will have more than just teachers. We've got our person table here. I'll add an ID for this table to serve as the primary key. Then we'll add in some fields that we know are common to all types of users. In this example, we'll add in the first name and last name. If you're thinking of your own database design, you'll have different fields. Now, because we're storing different types of people or users in this table, we want to indicate what type they are. There is a small list of defined values for this. In our school example, it could be teacher, parent, student, or admin staff. I recommend doing this by adding a lookup table and linking it to the main table. This allows validation for the types of people and allows you to change the values easily if you need to. So we'll create a new table called person type with an ID and a description. This description would have the values of a teacher or admin staff or parent or student. Then in the person table, we add the type ID as a foreign key, which links to the lookup table. Now for each record, we can indicate what type it is. What about all of the other fields? We will have some fields that are common to all types of people, some fields common to some types, and some that only exist for one type of person. All of these fields would go into the person table. So we may want to capture a date of birth in case we need to calculate the ages of students or send birthday messages to people. We may have an enrolment date that only applies to students. We could modify this to call it a start date, which would indicate that the date a staff member started or that a student has enrolled. So that's one way to do it. Continue adding fields to this table until all of your fields are captured. We may want to capture relationships between students and parents. This is a many-to-many relationship, so we'll need a joining table. We'll add one here called student parent and add the IDs of the person. One ID is the parent and one is the student. Notice that they both link to the person table. There's no way to validate that one is a parent and one is a student. There are a few advantages to this design. First, it's a little simpler. There are only two tables, one for people and one for the type. It also prevents duplication. If a person is a student and then becomes a teacher, they will only have a single person record, rather than two records in two tables. If you need to capture these changes in roles and when they happen, such as a student becoming a teacher, you can adjust the diagram. It does make it a little more complicated, but it's possible. There are a few disadvantages. You could have a lot of columns in a table and many of them don't apply to different types of users. This can make the table harder to work with. It's also harder to validate the data. It's hard to ensure that only the relevant columns are provided for the right types of users. For example, if a teacher has a seniority level that indicates how senior they are as a teacher, it's hard to prevent this from being populated for a student record. Also, there's no way to validate the many-to-many relationship between people to ensure it's parents and students. Let's look at the second option. Option 2 is a design where you have separate tables for each user role. Let's see what it looks like. With our school management app, we'll have one table for teachers. We have an ID, a first name and a last name. We also have a table for students, which also has an ID, first name and a last name. We have a table for staff which has the same fields. Finally, we have a table for parents with the same fields. Now let's add in some fields that apply to these types of records. We'll add a start date to both the staff and teacher tables. we can add an enrolment date to the student table, and this date does not apply to the parent table. We'll need to capture the parents of each student, so we can add a joining table between the two tables, called student parent, just like in the first option. However, in this option, we can ensure that one ID is the parent and one is the student. So that's how the design would work with different tables for each type. There are a few advantages to this design. It has better validation. You can ensure that the data that only applies to one record type is only specified for that record type, because the field is only in the table or tables that need it. We can also see this with the student parent table. You may also think this is a simpler design than the other option. There are more tables, but they are smaller and more focused, so you could argue that this is simpler. There are a few cons to this design. There is a risk of duplicate data. A person may exist in multiple tables, either with the same data or different data, each of which is a problem. This could happen if a person changes their type of role, such as a student becoming a teacher or a teacher becoming another staff member. On that note, it's harder to capture the fact that a person has two different roles at the same time or at different times. We've seen the two options. There are advantages to each, and the option you choose for your design comes down to a few considerations. Here are 2 questions you can answer about your design to help decide which option would be better for you. First, how similar are the different types of users? Do they have mostly the same data and functionality, or are they quite different? The more similar they are, the more likely that the single table approach would work better. Question 2, is it possible for a user to have 2 or more roles at once, or move between roles in their lifetime? If so, then the first option of a single table is probably easier. In general, I would recommend going with option 1, the single table for all users approach. You can use the role type lookup table to indicate the types of roles. It is a little harder to perform validation, but it could be done in the application or using stored procedures. But it depends on your specific requirements, so you might find option 2 works better for you, or you might find option 1 is better. The good thing is that it's software, and it's possible to make a change to the database design if you change your mind. Yes, even if it's deployed to production and the application has been built. Database changes are not as hard as they used to be, but that's a topic for another video. Let me know what you think of this video, or if you have any questions in the comments below. If you want to learn more about database design and SQL, visit my website at databasestar.com. If you like this video, consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.